This is Focus on Africa, live from our studio in Nairobi. I'm Nancy Kachingira. Now, as we continue our special coverage this week on the spread of fake news in Africa, we ask, do governments wield their power responsibly when it comes to online regulation? In one case, an Egyptian mother was locked up, accused of spreading fake news.
The space for expressing dissent in this country is obviously shrinking.
And what can you do as an individual when you're the target of fake news? We meet the Rwandan model whose online profile was stolen.
And I'm Sophie Ikenya in London. Also in the program, the United Nations Security Council votes unanimously to lift its sanctions against Eritrea with immediate effect. 1 year ago, tanks on the streets in Zimbabwe is signaling the beginning of the end of Robert Mugabe. But the economy is still in crisis. And in sports, Cameroon will find out on the 29th of this month whether or not it will retain the hosting rights for next year's Africa Cup of Nations.
Thank you for joining us on Focus on Africa on BBC World News, live from our studio in Nairobi. All this week, the BBC is examining the effects of the spread of false information. We continue our Beyond Fake News season today with a look at how governments are responding to both the reality and the perception of fake news. Just how free are we to say what we like online? I'll be examining which countries have the best and worst records for allowing freedom of expression. But first, let's turn to Egypt, where there are mounting concerns about a new law supposed to counter fake news, which is putting critical voices in jail. The BBC's Sally Nabil reports from Cairo.
احنا من 70 سنة فاتوا كنا أحسن من كده. كانت النسوان بتمشي في الشارع لابسة من جيب محدش بيقدر يقيم عينه فيها، ولو حد بس قال لها بنصور يا هانم تقول يا عسكري، العسكري المحترم يجي يجر على الاسم.
That's Amal Fathi, a 34-year-old Egyptian mother. She was venting her anger because twice in one day she had been sexually harassed. In her Facebook post, she blamed the government for failing to protect women. 2 days after she posted the video, came the knock at her door. Amal was arrested and separated from her family on charges of spreading fake news. I met Amal's husband, a human rights lawyer, in his Cairo office. He told me Amal is not the only person falling foul of the law in this way.
تهمة إذاعة أخبار كاذبة تم وضعها في القانون بغرض معين. الغرض دوت هو الحجر على أي رأي مخالف للرأي الرسمي. سواء كان الرأي دوت رأي سياسي، رأي اقتصادي، رأي اجتماعي.
The government says it's trying to fight rumors that destabilize the country.
21,000 شائعة في ثلاث شهور. الهدف منها إيه؟ الهدف منها بلبلة. الهدف منها عدم استقرار.
The government has now set up a hotline for Egyptians to report fake news and rumors, but the crackdown appears to go wider than that. Hundreds of websites have been blocked in Egypt since last year. Some of them belong to critical media organizations and some to human rights groups.
لا أرى على وجه الإطلاق أن في نوع من الاضطهاد الممنهج لبعض الآراء دون آراء أخرى. أنت حر في التعبير عن نفسك ما دام لا تضر بحرية الآخرين. وإذا اختلقت هذه الأخبار الكاذبة هحاسبك سواء كنت صحفي أو غير صحفي.
Amal's husband told me he hoped his wife would be freed on appeal and reunited with their 3-year-old son Zidan. While there might be some light at the end of the tunnel for Amal,
the space for expressing dissent in this country is obviously shrinking. And the phrase fake news is seen by many opponents as a powerful tool to silence them.
Well, the US-based watchdog organization Freedom House has published its annual Freedom on the Net report, looking at internet and digital media freedom around the world. The study tracked 65 countries and 87% of internet users in the past year. It found that digital freedom is getting worse. 40% of the countries tracked saw a decline in internet freedom, while less than a third improved. Let's take a closer look and see how African countries did compared to the rest. China remained the worst abuser of internet freedom in 2018, even hosting seminars for other country representatives on how to curtail internet freedom. At the other end is Estonia, which did best. Among the African countries analysed, Ethiopia and Egypt did worst overall in terms of internet freedom, ranking 62nd and 56th respectively out of 65 countries assessed, followed by Sudan, which came 49th. Egypt experienced the biggest decline in the year, together with Sri Lanka, with some people even being jailed for publishing satirical articles. But there's also positive news for Africa in the report, with South Africa coming 8th in the ranking, just behind the United Kingdom. Well, with me now is Maurice Odhiambo. He is the Regional Director, Project Director for Eastern Horn of Africa for Freedom House. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
That's not a good picture we just saw. Why is it getting worse across the continent in terms of internet freedoms?
I think there are a number of factors. If you look at the broader issues, there are issues of governance, so that you have certain countries where we are getting more authoritarian as we go on. In East Africa, for example, if you look at, you've talked about Ethiopia. If you look at the bigger horn, greater horn, Ethiopia doing badly. If you look at Rwanda, not doing very, very good either. So you have the countries that have embraced this authoritarian system of government. And so for those countries, things seem to be getting worse year in, year out. But also you have a bit of a lessons learning between these countries. So some of the laws like, Cyber Crimes Act that we are seeing around now, they seem to be spreading around the country, so that right now almost every country is talking about having a Cyber Crimes Act.
And you've been very critical of the one here in Kenya. Some might say, actually, that's a law that could prevent the spread of fake news. Why are you so against it?
Certainly there are genuine concerns. I mean, the law talks about child pornography, it talks about phishing, it talks about computer fraud, and so on and so forth. So there are those genuine concerns that ideally should then be, we should have a law in place that then takes care of that. But what we have seen continuously is that there's a way in which governments are not just trying to address these genuine concerns. In fact, they're trying to take advantage of this, just like the war against terrorism and how governments then use that to clamp up the civic space. So we are seeing the same trend, the same thing happening. So they keep pushing in some of these issues like, false news, publishing false news. We have laws already that can take care of that. In Kenya here, we know it's more like criminal defamation. It's basically trying to bring that back in because it was declared, the law, the penal code provision for that was declared unconstitutional. Basically trying to sneak that in.
Are you saying countries don't need more laws in order to fight fake news? If not that, then what do they need? What should governments be doing?
Let me just give an illustration of this. So for instance, we talk about harming, people's reputation. And that, as I said earlier, before it was taken care of by defamation acts. What the media has been asking in this country, for instance, and across the region, is that we need a good system of self-regulation. Now, here in Kenya, we have the Media Council, for example, where, complaints are forwarded, and they handle very many cases.
But a lot of fake news is spread by individuals. It's not necessarily organized mass media as we know it. So how do you tackle that aspect of it?
Which is true, and there are many ways in which these individuals, their identities can be known. So what then should happen is that the government should work with these agencies for self-regulation to try and rein them in, instead of boxing everybody into laws and criminalizing everything across the board. That cannot really work. And look at social media now. Look at the use across the world. Kenya itself has very, very high levels of penetration right now. How many people are you going to jail? It's impossible. So we need to look at these alternative ways in which these issues can be handled. Even as we take care of the genuine concerns when it comes to issues of fraud, we know that banks are losing a lot of money in this country. So it comes to such issues, then criminalize, make sure you jail everybody. But when it comes to things that can be dealt with in a different way, then that is what we want to see.
All right. Thank you so much, Maurice Odhiambo from Freedom House, for joining us this evening. Well, what about now the victims of fake news? Karine Iranhunda is a Rwandan model and blogger. She was impersonated online and was devastated after her social media accounts were flooded with condolences when it was reported on another site that she'd taken her own life. Here's her story.
My name is Karine Iranhunda. I'm a commercial model. I'm also a vlogger. So most of my pictures are out there. And sadly, with the internet, you can't get to control who gets access to your pictures. Someone got my pictures off, I'm sure, the internet or the page that I model for. So they created a whole fake account using my pictures. They changed my name. This particular one that goes with the name Martha Kwamboka on Facebook, the person posted a suicide note and had threatened to commit suicide. I have dealt with my pictures being used for ads for like slimming pills or something, or tummy teas, or people putting your picture and just saying that you took their husband. But this one was the craziest thing because it had people typing RIPs under that post. Can you imagine people typing RIP under your picture and you're alive?
Well, that's a pretty chilling example. So what can we do to make sure we don't fall for fake news? Well, right now, let's talk to Anim van Wyk. She's chief editor at Africa Check, and she's joining us from our Johannesburg bureau. Hello, Anim. So if you were tasked with coming up with a to-do list for how not to fall for fake news, what would be on that list? What are your top tips?
Well, it's a very complex solution or a complex problem that requires a very detailed solution. So first and foremost, we need to tighten especially like the platforms, the technology that people have access to. There should be enough laws and measures taken to protect people. And platforms also need to take responsibility for what's happening and what is being shared. That said, being the internet age and it being quite new with new generations coming online, we need media literacy for people to be critical, to look at news carefully, to evaluate it and not to press that share button too quickly. So yeah, that's what we're doing at Africa Check. We're trying to enhance media literacy and get people to be responsible internet users while keeping people online accountable for what they do.
All right, thank you very much, Anim van Wyk, editor at Africa Check, for those tips. Well, as I hand back to you, Sophie, I've certainly learned a thing or two about how to spot fake news, and I hope our audience has as well. Of course, one question that still remains is whose responsibility is it to make sure that fake news doesn't continue to spread? And I think one thing we've learned this week is that it's the responsibility that we all have and we all carry just to make sure that we're safe online and offline. So back to you, Sophie.
All right, Nancy Kachungira there for us in Nairobi. And those reports you heard earlier are part of our special season across the BBC News this week. There is, of course, plenty more online. Simply go to bbc.com/fake news and join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag #BeyondFakeNews. This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News with me, Sophie Ikenya. Still to come, sports, the African Women's Cup of Nations kicks off this weekend. Algeria will be appearing for the 5th time. Will this be their lucky year? I'm Sophie Ikenya and you're watching Focus on Africa from BBC World News. The top story on this program: restricted digital freedoms in Egypt. One mother has been locked up accused of spreading fake news. Now, in the last few hours, the United Nations Security Council has lifted sanctions against Eritrea. This is the largest sign that Eritrea's years of isolation may be coming to an end after a landmark peace deal with Ethiopia earlier this year. Now, the arms embargo, asset freeze and travel ban were imposed in 2009. Well, joining us now to discuss this further is Mary Harper, BBC Africa editor. Thank you for taking time to talk to us, Mary. Remind us why these sanctions were imposed in the first place.
Yes, the United Nations imposed these quite harsh sanctions on Eritrea after it was accused of basically supporting the Somali Islamist group Al-Shabaab. It was accused of funding them, accused of arming them and training their troops. And so the United Nations decided to impose these sanctions, which have kind of further increased Eritrea's isolation from the rest of the world. So it is really a dramatic day for Eritrea and in fact the whole region that these sanctions have been lifted.
So does it now mean that the UN believes that Eritrea was not involved at all?
It's saying it has a group of independent monitors who are experts and they periodically do detailed research, and they in fact just issued a new report a few hours before the sanctions were lifted, and their top finding for Eritrea was that for the past 5 years they have found no evidence that Eritrea is supporting Al-Shabaab. Therefore, if they can't find any evidence, nobody's going to. And also Eritrea has always strongly denied that it supports Al-Shabaab.
So what will be the impact of this lifting of sanctions?
It will certainly make travel easier because certain Eritrean senior officials have been unable to travel for years, the fact that they'll have their assets unlocked, and also the fact that basically it's a sign that Eritrea is being welcomed back into the international community. And in a way, as you said at the beginning, the fact that Ethiopia has kind of spearheaded this change. It ended a 20-year conflict with Eritrea. Eritrea is now friends with Somalia, the government, even though it's been accused of supporting the government's enemy, Al-Shabaab. Even Djibouti, that was a big enemy of Eritrea. They're all coming up, they're all joining each other. So it's just, you know, the whole of the Horn of Africa is transforming before our eyes.
Indeed. Mary Harper, thank you for your thoughts. Thank you. Now, 1 year ago, Zimbabwe's army staged a coup which quickly led to the end of Robert Mugabe's presidency. Today, his party remains in charge and refers to the coup as the restoration. Mr. Mugabe's former deputy, Emmerson Mnangagwa, is now president and has been promising economic reforms to rescue the economy and steps to end its international isolation. So how are things going a year on? The BBC's Shinga Enyoka reports from Harare.
Under the cover of darkness, the military rolled onto these streets exactly a year ago. It was a surreal night of gunfire, arrests and anxiety. It was also the beginning of the end for the iron-fisted Robert Mugabe in power for 37 years.
Moved.
4 hours later, a general appeared on television.
Firstly, we wish to assure the nation that His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe, and Commander-in-Chief of the Zimbabwe Defense Forces, Comrade R.G. Mugabe, and his family are safe.
The military believed that Zimbabwe had lost its way and that this operation, which they called Operation Restore Legacy, would end corruption, bring back a return to the rule of law and restore economic prosperity. Thousands of Zimbabweans marched on these streets to celebrate the demise of President Robert Mugabe. But a year on, much of the change that was promised is yet to materialize. While there's a degree of freedom that was not seen under President Robert Mugabe, just 3 months ago, 6 civilians were shot to death on these streets during post-election protests. Under President Emmerson Mnangagwa, the economy has experienced its worst crisis in a decade. And so as Zimbabweans mark a year since those unprecedented events, many are wondering whether last November's celebrations were premature.
Shinga Enyoka reporting there. Let's take a quick look now at other stories making headlines across Africa and the rest of the world. The military in Cameroon says 29 separatists have been killed in English-speaking parts of the country. The photos of the dead showed their bodies arranged in lines with weapons placed beside them. The army said no government soldiers were killed. The head of the World Food Programme, David Beasley, has warned that Yemen is facing what could be the world's worst humanitarian disaster in 100 years. And the World Food Programme is urging all parties to the conflict to protect its facilities so that people can be kept alive. A rare pink diamond has fetched $50 million at auction, a record price per carat. The diamond, named Pink Legacy, weighs just under 19 carats and was bought by US brand Harry Winston at auction in Geneva. You're watching BBC Focus on Africa. Let's now find out what's happening in the world of sport. Peter.
Many thanks, Sophie. And Cameroon will find out on the 29th of this month whether or not it will retain the hosting rights for next year's Africa Cup of Nations. There's been concerns over the readiness of the infrastructure needed and the security in the country. Amaju Pinnick is the president of the Nigeria Football Federation and first vice president of CAF. He believes Cameroon has done enough to host the competition.
My committee will be meeting on the 27th, where we will look at it finally and make a presentation to the executive committee, which of course will take the decision on the 29th of this month. But I believe Cameroon has been working really, really hard, and seriously from the depth of my soul. I don't think we should go anywhere else, but they should also consider the fact that we've given them a lot of opportunities, we've given them a lot of privileges in terms of completing their facilities, and we cannot move this tournament because of the country.
Now, the president of the Kenya Football Federation has told the BBC that they have now appealed to the Court of Arbitration for Sport over their last-minute exclusion from the Africa Women's Cup of Nations, which kicks off this Saturday in Ghana. They were ousted from the tournament at the last minute after Equatorial Guinea were readmitted, having had a ban for using an ineligible player overturned. Well, Algeria will be taking part in the tournament for the 5th time. They've never got out of the group stages, but will this year bring better luck?
Since we qualified with wins against Senegal and Ethiopia, a lot of people are talking about us, especially on social media. It's good, it means the girls are becoming more interesting.
I'm very excited as it is my first call-up. It's really a joy for me and I can see the enthusiasm around the team. The girls are really happy to be part of this Cup of Nations. It's an honor to be part of this team. It's super cool.
Hyper cool pour moi.
The impression that we want to give to the Algerian people is that we are a combative side that really fights for the shirt. Even if we don't necessarily play the most beautiful football, we will always give our best in every game, from start to finish. The most important is to try your best, all together.
Jusqu'à la dernière minute, tous ensemble. Voilà.
Premièrement, je représente la femme algérienne, la femme arabe et la femme musulmane.
First, I represent Algerian women, Arab women, and Muslim women. We can always dream. I don't think I can express what World Cup qualification would mean to me right now. I would rather wait for the moment to arrive.
Lots of football in the next few days, Sophie. The African Women's Cup of Nations and then qualifiers for the men's version for Cameroon next year also taking place. Which will you be looking forward to?
I'm really looking forward to the Africa
Women's
Cup of Nations. I might just get inspired to try, playing football.
I'd love to see that.
You'd love to see that. Well, Peter, thank you for the support. Thank you. And now, of course, we will leave you with the joy of a first snowfall. Zebika, aged 7, and Kadir, who is only 5, enjoying their first flurry of snow. They arrived in Canada along with their mother and the rest of their family last week, originally from Eritrea. They spent the last 5 years in a refugee camp in Sudan. Look at that. It's beautiful. Don't forget, you can get in touch with me and some of the team on Twitter. I'm @CKenye. That's all from the program and the rest of the Focus on Africa team from here in Nairobi. Thanks for your company. Bye-bye.